Enroll your child for the manifested e-learning platform and see their grades grow tremendously. These videos can be downloaded to a laptop for offline viewing or viewed from a smartphone in a cost-friendly format.
Welcome to Manifested e-learning. We are going to have a lesson in history and government, and we are looking at the topic European invasion of Africa and the process of colonization. Specifically, we have been looking at factors for the scramble for Africa. And in our previous lesson, my dear learner, I explained to you that these factors can be grouped into political factors, social factors, economic factors, and the strategic factors. And in our previous lesson, we looked at the political factors. That was the first one. The first factor that we looked at was political factors. We discussed them and we gave three political factors that were key that motivated or led to the European powers getting or scrambling for territories in Africa. Can you remember the three political factors that we discussed in our last lesson? Yes, which were they? Good. We talked of the unification of Germany, right? And then number two, we talked of nationalism. And then lastly, we talked of what? We talked of militarism. So these are the things that we discussed. We talked of unification of Germany. Then we mentioned as militarism. And then we also talked of nationalism. That was the first or the three political factors that led to the scramble for Africa. Unification of Germany, militarism, and then we have nationalism. So in our lesson today, my dear learner, we are going to look at the social factors. So we are going to look at the second group of factors, which we are calling the social factors that led to the scramble and for Africa. Do not forget that we are looking at the factors that led to the scramble for Africa. We have looked at political factors, and now today we are going to look at the social factors. There are many, so it is plural. We are going to look at four of them, four social factors. So by the end of this lesson, my dear learner, I want you to be able to describe and explain the social factors that led to what? The scramble for African continent. Who was scrambling for the African continent? The European powers. Very good. And even in the previous lesson, we gave these European powers. Can you be able to mention them? Yes. Tell your sister or your mom the European powers that were scrambling for the European powers, for the African continent. So, my dear learner, let us go down and look at these social factors. What are these social factors? The first social factor, let us call it Roman 1. The first social factor, we are going to talk of racialism. Racialism. That is the first social factor that we are going to talk about that encouraged the European powers to come and colonize or get territories in Africa. So when you talk of racialism, it comes from the word race. race. That means you are either African or you are European, right? You are Asian. So it is your descent, your race. From which race do you come? Do you come from? So the European powers or the European thought at that time, or they believed their race was superior. So European race was thought to be superior or better than all the other races. The Europeans thought we are better off because of their color, maybe because of their color, maybe because of their skin, of the hair texture, right? Maybe because of their eyes. So they considered themselves better than the Africans, because now we are talking of Africa. So they considered themselves better than Africans. They did not value the Africans. So when they were coming to get the continent or the territories, they had in their mind to occupy these areas and confine Africans in smaller areas. That was the thinking they had. And then on the other hand, they wanted to civilize. Civilization. They thought the African continent was backward. They thought the African continent was backward, that we were not civilized people because of how we were dressing, how we were talking. We could not talk the language of the Europeans. So they thought we are uncivilized or we are backward. And because of this, Africa was referred to as the dark continent. As the dark continent. Africa was referred to as the dark continent. They considered Africa to be dark. Why? We did not have the industries that were in Europe. We did not speak the language the Europeans were speaking. We did not have the roads that the Europeans had. We did not even have the gadgets of communication that the Europeans had. So Africa was considered to be a dark continent. So they came to Africa to socialize us or to civilize the Africans, to bring their civilization or to enlighten the Africans. That was a reason why they came. So they considered the African race to be less superior. That is why even as we continue to look at how they treated the Africans, they treated the Africans without regard, without respect, because they thought the Africans are inferior or they are not able to think even on themselves. That is why the Europeans came to make decisions for them. That is about racism or racialism. And then the second point we talk of, they wanted to settlement of surplus European population. So, because of the climate that was in Africa, the European powers discovered through the European explorers that the African continent is good for settlement. It had a conducive environment, right? Compared to their motherland, right? So when they came to Africa, they had an idea that they were coming to live here. They had no intention of going back to their motherland. Why? Because the environment in Africa is very conducive. It is warm, right? Remember, we are along the tropics, right? So we have a very conducive environment. It is not extremely hot, it's not extremely cold. So they thought this area would be good to settle the European population. They had also grown in numbers. So they wanted to find, in case this land of ours is not able to settle us, maybe you could go and settle in other areas. Remember, the Africans had not really had that large number, right? So there was vast land to settle in. So that is the next reason of the Europeans coming to Africa. So let us look at the third reason why they came to Africa. The third social reason, they needed to abolish slave trade. Abolish slave trade. When you talk of slave trade, as you can remember in your Form 1 work, you looked at how the slave trade was happening at the East African coast, right? During the time of the Sultan, during the long distance trade, slaves became a commodity that was being sold. Where were they going? They were going to be working at the plantations that were at the coast, right? And then at that time in West Africa, there was another international trade that was going on. That was known as the transatlantic trade. So slave trade was considered. There were some humanitarian organizations that came about to fight or to talk against slave trade. So there were humanitarian organizations that pressured the government to stop slave trade. So the governments came in Africa with the view of ending the slave trade. Remember, these were Africans who were being sold as slaves, as laborers, to provide the labor that was needed in the industries or in the farms to produce raw materials for the industries in Europe, right? So some of the European powers came with the view of abolishing this slave trade. Why? Because of the pressure that was mounted on them, because of the humanitarian organization. There was also the Marxist ideology. So there was a scholar known as Karl Marx, right? At that time, he came and brought this idea that free labor is more productive than slave labor. So there was a change in thinking. So they came with the knowledge of, let us come and establish legitimate trade. Let us establish a legitimate trade. So instead of us forcing the Africans to give us slaves, let us come and offer them better items or better ideas that they are going to embrace. So that is legitimate trade. So it encouraged more powers to come to establish legitimate trade and do away with the slave trade that was very common and had become very popular, because the slaves, you do not buy them, right? As an African leader, we are going to look at, I'm sure you have mentioned them in your Form 2 work, right? How the slaves were acquired, right? So it was a cheap way of trading. But now they came to establish a legitimate trade. They were looking for markets for their trade goods. Remember, they are industrializing. Back at home, they are producing a lot of products. So they need a market. And you cannot get a market when you are mistreating them, or when there is slave trade. People are feeling they are mistreated. So they needed to establish legitimate trade. Right? So, my dear, that is how slave trade, or the ideology of abolishing slave trade, encouraged the European powers to come into the African continent and acquire colonies. So, in the process of abolishing and establishing this legitimate trade, they acquired areas. And as we are going to see, they established companies, right? They established companies that would run the trade. So that is how the slave trade contributed. The slave trade contributed to the coming of the European powers into the continent of Africa. So they had to scramble. Many of them came, each one of them, wherever they are, trying to abolish slave trade and establish legitimate trade that is acceptable to all. Now, let us come to the last social factor that is going to we are going to discuss in this lesson. Number 4, we are talking of missionary activities. Missionary activities. So, another reason why the European powers came was some of them, they had sent missionaries to come and spread Christianity. So they viewed the African practices as being barbaric. They did not consider the religion or the beliefs of the Africans to be legitimate. They thought of them as backward, right? So they came to spread Christianity. So these missionaries that came to evangelize and to spread the gospel, right, asked for protection. So the missionaries asked for protection from their home governments. The missionaries asked for protection from their home government. So as a missionary, you have come to evangelize, for example, in West Africa. You need to ask for protection from your home ground, or from your home, from your mother government. Those who came to East Africa, we have talked of the Johann Rebmann, right? They had to go and ask for protection from the German government, right? So that is how Christianity and the missionary activities, right, contributed to them. So as the government sends protection, right, we are talking of protection. So as it sends protection, who is the protection? It is the military, of course, right, or the army people, right? So as you make this protection, you are learning about the area and you are able to exercise control, because this protection happened in communities where the missionaries were rejected. You did not need protection where you are accepted. You needed protection where you have been rejected. So as they come to protect these missionaries, to evangelize, they exercised control over the communities. And that is how eventually there was colonization of those communities. So my dear learner, we have looked at 4 reasons, or 4 social reasons why the European powers came to occupy or get colonies in Africa. We have talked of racialism or racism. We have talked of they needed to settle the surplus European population. And then they needed to abolish slave trade. Or another way you can put this point is, you can say it is they wanted to establish legitimate trade. And then lastly, we have looked at the missionary activities. And we have said the missionaries asked for protection from their mother governments. So they needed protection as they spread the gospel. So let us, as we conclude this lesson, let us write down this question that you are going to answer in your books. So a revision question. A revision question. Just one. State the social reasons for the scramble. For the scramble of, the scramble not of, for the scramble for Africa by European nations. State the social reasons for the scramble for Africa by the European nations. And I believe, my dear learner, you are well able to tackle and answer that question. So we have come to the end of our lesson today. I hope you have had a good time, and now you understand the social reasons why the European powers had to colonize or came to colonize Africa. Until the next time we shall meet, bye-bye.
Thank you for choosing to study with us. For more information, you can call us on 0724 173845.